Okay, so I'm sure we all know about this guy. He was part of one of the most notorious cases of exploitation in our generation, and I'm sure we all know that there are even more cases like this that are going to continue to be uncovered over the next decade or so. But I saw this comment on my Manitoba video about this place called Rotherham and decided to look into it. And let me tell you, I began a journey that would teach me about a city in South Yorkshire, England, that was the site of a scandal that resulted in the exploitation of hundreds of children that spanned over 2 decades. So today, we're going to talk about the Rotherham child exploitation scandal. Believe it or not, arrests of the men and women involved in these crimes have been happening well into 2024. Police began to respond to allegations of children being hurt by the exploitation ring back in 1997. This ring had supposedly been in operation since the 1980s. However, as time went on, it became painfully clear that the authorities failed to recognize just how widespread this issue was. In 2000, Yorkshire solicitor Adele Ware was hired to conduct a study meant to analyze exploitation rings in various cities and towns, and among that list was a city called Rotherham. It revealed that Rotherham in particular had been plagued with a network of child exploitation that involved hundreds of victims, with the majority of perpetrators being Asian men who were specifically from the Middle East. One man, who was later jailed for 35 years in 2016, had amassed a group of 18 girls that he had been intimidating into submission for years. Upon turning in her findings, Ware was scolded for revealing the ethnic origin of the men, resulting in her being booked for a 2-day ethnicity and diversity course to raise awareness on ethnic issues. The files containing Ware's research into the cases mysteriously disappeared. Consequent reports in 2002, 2003, and 2006 were also oddly sidelined, just like Ware's was. The 2003 report was of considerable note as it detailed findings that boys were also being taken advantage of by these gangs. An eminent British newspaper called The Times published a 2012 article that shed a light on a confidential police report from 2010 that warned that the authorities should pay attention to a string of thousands of exploitation crimes against children by gangs both in Rotherham and another city almost 7 miles southwest of Rotherham called Sheffield. The article claimed that these warnings were being taken far too lightly by law enforcement. Offenses went unprosecuted, despite police and child protection agencies in Rotherham having had knowledge of these crimes for decades, the paper said. In an article published in September of that year, Rotherham MP Dennis McShane said that the police kept the issue a secret from politicians. The South Yorkshire Police denied hiding the issue. That November, 5 men were arrested in relation to the crimes. These would be the first of many arrests that would be made over the next 14 years. The police claimed that the Times characterization of the police force was a gross and unfair distortion. The Rotherham Borough Council set up an investigative team to look into the issues detailed by the news publication. Eventually, the council commissioned an independent inquiry to be led by Professor Alexis J. 2014 saw the publication of a report by Professor J that revealed that a conservative estimate of 1,400 children in Rotherham had been targeted and exploited by gangs, with victims as young as 11 years old. As far as details about the assailants, it was found that the gangs were predominantly comprised of Pakistani men. The publication of the article resulted in a council leader's resignation. Council leader Roger Stone resigned immediately following Professor J's publication and was followed within the next 6 months by the Chief Executive Martin Kimber, Children's Services Director Joyce Thacker, and her predecessor, the Police and Crime Commissioner Sean Wright, who had previously headed the department between 2005 and 2010. Before long, the Chief Constable of South Yorkshire Police asked the National Crime Agency to lead an independent investigation into the Rotherham allegations. This investigation, called Operation Stovewood, would go down as the single largest investigation into non-familial child exploitation in UK history. That same year, the Independent Office for Police Conduct launched Operation Linden to examine how South Yorkshire Police responded to the exploitation complaints following Professor J's report. It found that over 40 officers had engaged in misconduct, but were not subject to disciplinary action as a result of loopholes in policy. Sammy Woodhouse, who herself was 14 years old when she began to be exploited by the gang, and 16 when she began to put in reports to the police, stated that no one had been held accountable for disregarding the hundreds of reports that had been coming in. If they would have acted when I was making statements at 16, it could have prevented other people from even being harmed. The fact that they were ignoring it for so long just encouraged the man who was hurting me, not just him, but other people. Another survivor, who had also been targeted at age 14, shared that she had come in contact with the police 3 to 4 times per week over the course of her time being exploited by the gang, and that they failed to take the initiative to realize that she needed help. It was determined that not only were the Rotherham agencies ill-equipped to deal with the immense scale of organized crime that these gangs were engaging in, but also the sheer number of children being affected. There were also issues of plain negligence in regard to how officers responded to the concerns of the children's parents, with one saying, "It's a fashion accessory for girls in Rotherham to have an older Asian boyfriend. They'll grow out of it." The reality was that these children were being systematically targeted and conditioned into accepting the advances of these men, after which they were physically threatened and harmed to keep them under the gang's control. The authorities failed to recognize the children as victims who were conditioned into enduring these terrible situations. Instead, the children were viewed as willing participants who consented to the exploitation and wanted to be treated this way. Apart from that, investigation teams who genuinely tried to help the children were not given enough resources to help them tackle the problem and were left feeling overwhelmed. Not only that, but a number of the officers took the perpetrators' claims that the girls wanted to be passed around in these gangs at face value and showed little empathy for the survivors. Woodhouse shared that the police missed multiple opportunities to stop the man who had been hurting her. It was also revealed that local Pakistani leaders were involved in hiding the issue when Parveen Qureshi, the director of the United Multicultural Center in Rotherham, claimed that Pakistani community leaders in Rotherham were complicit in hushing up the shocking ethnic dimensions of the carnal exploitation rather than speaking out. Before long, the Chief Constable of South Yorkshire Police asked the National Crime Agency to lead an independent investigation into the Rotherham allegations. This investigation, called Operation Stovewood, would go down as the single largest investigation into non-familial child exploitation in UK history. British Muslims and members of the British Pakistani community condemned both the exploitation and the cover-up by the community leaders. Nazir Afzal, who held the role of Chief Crown Prosecutor of the Crown Prosecution Service for North West England from 2011 to 2015, posited that the cases were more about the display of male power than religious beliefs. The case garnered worldwide attention. In 2016, it was reported that the criminal gang was an organization that made a profit in various criminal activity, including the selling of illegal substances and the exploitation of children, with the trade of children alone being a multi-million-pound industry. And between 2016 and 2018, even more arrests were made. In 2018, Sammy Woodhouse published her autobiography, Just a Child, which detailed her experience being one of the victims of the Rotherham exploitation gang and how she survived. As sad as her story is, I'm glad that Sammy was able to share what happened to her so that the public can be more aware of how serious this issue really is, how it isn't really as hidden as one thinks, and that it really does happen in plain sight. The cases led to the erroneous belief that the majority of UK exploitation gangs were run by British Pakistani men. However, a 2020 study conducted by the British government found that the majority of UK exploitation gangs were actually run by European men, with some studies indicating an overrepresentation of Asian and Black men when taking into account their proportion in relation to the rest of the UK population. Arrests related to the Rotherham scandal have continued well into 2024, and more arrests could be made in the coming years. I was shocked by the age range of the perpetrators. The youngest was 20 years old upon his arrest in 2010, and the oldest, a 77-year-old man, was arrested this year. In regard to the treatment of the survivors by the authorities, various officials came forward to offer their apologies and a commitment to do better. For example, General Director Peter Lockwood said, "No child or young person can ever consent to their own exploitation, nor should be seen as bringing matters upon themselves. Your protection should not have been seen as a lesser policing priority." The South Yorkshire Police offered their deepest apologies, adding that the victims deserved better. "We let victims down. We failed to recognize their vulnerability and failed to see them as victims. For that, I am deeply sorry. They deserved better from us." The brave accounts of these girls caused a seismic change in policing crimes of this nature for South Yorkshire Police and the wider police service. South Yorkshire Police has improved, but there is still a long way to go before trust is rebuilt, ensuring the people of South Yorkshire have confidence in their police force again. I came away from this story feeling and thinking about a lot. I thought about how messed up it is that our society really does have a hard time showing compassion for children who are conditioned into accepting these exploitative situations. There are people in the world who will actually make excuses for the adults. They'll claim that the adult is the victim of the children, when the adult was the one who purposely exposed the children to inappropriate situations to get them accustomed to having their boundaries crossed. And then when the resulting mental and behavioral issues show up in these children, we blame them and talk about them as if they caused bad people to target them. I was upset that there were community leaders who helped hide the crimes and silence the victims. I thought about how these cases caused people to forget that crime knows no color. A person's ethnicity does not make them more or less likely to commit a crime. The 2020 report by the British government illustrated that. This scandal also made me think about how people can sometimes allow the fear of being misperceived as racist stop them from saving children in situations like this, where the perpetrators are part of a nation's racial minority. Racism is a real thing. There is no such thing as a society that has never grappled with the urge to be vile and inhumane to people who are different. I know that the UK, just like any other nation, has issues with some form of prejudice, both in its past and present, but this should never affect whether or not people are held accountable for doing something horrible like this. I am proud of both the survivors and parents for going to the police. Even though in the beginning they were not taken seriously, they spoke out anyway, and their courage eventually got the attention of the world. As I read about these various scandals, I noticed a pattern of how these issues captured people's attention. It was often the parents, victims, and journalists who refused to be silent who helped blow the lid off these crimes and make representatives do something. That's usually how a lot of change happens. When people join together and speak up about an issue, it can't be ignored or swept under the rug anymore. I want to thank this commenter for the recommendation. I had no idea this happened. I'm happy I got to look into it and share what I found. And everyone, please feel free to tell me about events you want me to talk about. I'm learning so much from you guys. I also want to thank you all for your many encouraging messages. I've really enjoyed reading about your views and perspectives. Also, I recently passed the 1,000 subscriber milestone, and I want to give a very special thank you to everyone who has subscribed to this channel. I'm so glad that you're enjoying these videos. Making them has been a great creative outlet for me, and I really like sharing them with you. With that said, have you ever heard of this scandal? And what's your opinions about it? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.